said, by the way governments are ruled. If these rulers are interested in setting up modern states, modern bureaucracies to achieve declared objectives by consensus. None of this does exist today. And legislation that is being introduced into parliaments, elected parliament, elections are rigged all over. We've seen this happen in Jordan in the last parliamentary elections and in the last municipal elections. The municipal elections were scandalous. Army buses pulled in and voted openly for government candidates. So I think to say we need time, Chile made it in much shorter time. Why do we need time?
Let him just reply.
Okay, I'm from Yemen, and Yemen just started, the Republic of Yemen, it's only 18 years old. Do you consider it, is it an enough time to actually, start practicing democracy like the United States, where it's been there for 220 years or something like that?
Hamzawy, you wanted to reply to that.
Let's agree on differentiating between looking at a society like Yemen or Egypt or Morocco with all due differences between them and saying, well, are they moving, are they changing? Of course they are changing, and there are processes. And between taking at a certain moment of time an evaluation of democracy and democratic transition. Yemen hasn't been moving forward. I observed the last parliamentary elections in Yemen, and what Mustafa said on local and parliamentary elections did apply very much to what happened in Yemen. Army buses, security buses, elections were rigged, gerrymandering as usual, no efficient and, in fact, powerful international observation was allowed in.
So, is it halted now?
I would say it is. It's a still stand.
Well,
it's a still
how is it
stand
halted? You just said that we had good practice of democracy just a year ago, and we're having parliamentary elections next year.
I'm saying elections were rigged in Yemen. I'm saying parliamentary elections were rigged, were not really observed. I'm saying that the ruling establishment around President Salah did deal with the opposition spectrum and its candidates the same way it has been.
All right, I'm going to stop you there.
One last point about me.
I'm sorry, you've made a lot of points and we have a lot of questions. I'm going to take one from the front row, please. Yusuf, we'll get a microphone to you, please. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Yemenis have been able to choose their local governments at one point of time, but they are unable to move the ruler who is really orchestrating this theatrical play that they call democracy in the Arab world.
And where are you from?
From Yemen.
Okay. Your view is that things used to be better in Yemen than they are
Yes,
now.
it's fluctuating depending on outside pressure. But my argument was that at the grassroots, we are the people, we don't feel there is progress.
Right.
And I'm supporting your argument against this motion.
Right, Chidiac, you want to come in on that?
I'm not
You're
so
saying
well
democracy
is
marching on?
Yemen, but I think since you feel that inside the society you are working towards establishing some new system and institutions, by time you will be able to change to get to the ruler. So you need a little time.
Gentleman in the third row, you have a question.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My question is to the opposition side of the motion. How can you claim that democracy is not in a halt while in Egypt you find people, if they join certain groups, like for example Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin and some other groups, they either get thrown into jail or sent to exile? How can you claim
Salah
that?
Al-Shaikhly.
This is what distinguishes our society from that of other established democracies. We have not been able to be in opposition and to work within the civil society, within the people, to return the government around. And that has been our problem. When we
So
are
it's
in
the fault of
opposition,
the people and
when
not-
we are
not
in
despotic
opposition, we
rulers.
want to raise arms against the government. And of course, the government
Mustafa
will
Hamarneh
fight
wants to
us
come
in
in.
return. And I think we have to learn to be in opposition. We have to learn, when we are in government, to treat everybody
Dr.
on
Al-Shaikhly,
equal
I want to
footing.
bring Mustafa
No,
Hamarneh in.
evidence points to the contrary. In some Arab societies where fragmentation is very noticeable and oppression is very strong, the mobilization is almost an impossibility for people to mobilize and change governments in place or policies in place. And in relatively open societies, Morocco, Bahrain, and Jordan, there are obstacles everywhere you turn. If you attempt to mobilize or introduce politics into public life, if you campaign and if you're a candidate for parliamentary elections and you use politics or programs in your campaign, you're on the bad list of the state and of the mukhabarat.
I want to ask the questioner. Excuse me. I just want to bring the questioner back in a moment because he's, after all, asking the question. Please.
I'm pessimistic to some extent. For example, I want to give you an example like Ayman Noor, who ran for the president against Mubarak and got sent to jail. How about that?
I would go to the alternative to your question. What do? We pack in and sit our home and let the rulers go ahead and do this? We don't. You see, we continue in our political...
We who?
We the people.
We have to resist.
We the people. This is where democracy starts from. We the people do what
Even
we
what
think...
happened with people from
But
the internet and Facebook, they were oppressed, but it's a start of something very important that we have to take in consideration. It was really amazing for me to read in the newspaper that people moving through Facebook were able to create a threat to the government. It was very important.
Chidiac, you said a moment ago, and I don't think people heard you, but you said it quite quietly, we have to resist.
Yes.
It's up to the people to resist despotic governments.
Of course, if people want
Even though all the levers of power are in their hands, it's up to them to resist, to fight.
They have to fight. We can find different ways to fight, to reach our goals, but we have to start somewhere. And people have to react, sometimes peacefully, sometimes, no, they have to react in a different way. But I, all the time, repeat that when people all over the world, and even the American and the French presidents, for example, when they saw 1.5 million Lebanese people going to the streets and rallying to the downtown for the first time, all together, Christians and Muslims, asking Syria out and to implement the resolution, UN Resolution 1559, this made the change in Lebanon. Otherwise, we would have never seen this change. Even though we had a UN resolution, it didn't mean that this resolution was going to be applied. 425 needed 20 years to be applied.
Okay, I'm going to take another question. Gentleman in the fourth row there, please. You.
The argument is too generic regarding the Arab world. If you segment the Arab world into different parts, look at the GCC, for example, it's totally different than what you'd have in Lebanon and Iraq. If you get someone elected every time and sort of change the leader, it would become a mess due to the tribal and Islamic system involved in this situation.
So you're saying democracy doesn't suit the GCC?
No, it does suit the GCC. Definitely it does, but it's a different sort of democracy. You can't implement the same democracy everywhere.
This is not the argument we're making. There are specificities to every Bilad al-Sham is different than the Gulf, different than the Arab Peninsula, and different than North America. But there are North Africa. But there are components, there are ingredients that make this democratic whole, which Amr outlined very clearly. Now there are transition periods. I think in the GCC, the Gulf countries, the money is playing the mystifying role. There is so much money here that the discussions of transparency, accountability, rotation of government are non-existent. But look back at the GCC when majority of the population and of the elite who went to study in Cairo became Arab nationalists, and they set up the progressive newspapers and progressive structures in the early stages of the GCC countries. Now we see a total regression on that. And this is applicable, I think, elsewhere in the Arab world. We need to adopt these values and these practices.
Do you think it's coming to a halt then, the democracy in, let's say, the GCC?
I think not only...
You don't think it's developing then with all the cases?
We're talking about political development. It's not happening in these countries. There is no political development as we've defined it in this gathering.
All right. I'm going to take a question from the gentleman in the second row. Just a reminder, we're talking about this House believing that progress towards democracy has halted in the Arab world.
My question is, I take exception to two things. Why? Number one, why we blame the West and the foreigners for everything? We blame ourselves. If you want to blame somebody, look at the mirror. Nepal is an example. A few months ago, the Nepalese people forced the king to resign. And to give him credit, he didn't even leave the country. He gave the throne and he stayed in. So my question, why we blame the West for everything? Number two, I think a strong exception for putting Iraq right now and Lebanon as a democracy model. Iraq is not a democracy model, it's under occupation, and if anybody can say it is really democracy, then I'm from another planet. Thank you.
They are working towards democracy.